examples that we have brought from real cases in Latin America and in Mozambique. We will see how PMCs, Participatory Environmental Monitoring Committees, work in different countries. And we will try to see them from different perspectives: the internal governance one, the learning one, the socio-economic and environmental perspective. In parallel, we will be discussing how good practices on those dimensions ensure the correct development of PMC's work, thus enable them to shape decision-making. So my name is Alexandra Gil, and for the last 8 months, I've been working as Project Support Officer for Extractive Industries in the United Nations Development Program Regional Hub in Panama. So we deal with all issues related to Latin America and the Caribbean. In collaboration with UNDP New York, with the UNDP New York-based team, I'm coordinating a research about PMCs in Argentina, in Bolivia, in Panama, and in Peru that I'll introduce you shortly. Together with me today, we have Flaviano Bianchini, who you already heard this morning. He's the founder and director of the NGO Source International that works with communities facing environmental pollution issues and health problems, especially relating to extractive industries. He's also a member of the Board of Advisors to the Environmental Governance Program. So what we'll be discussing today, I will make, so this is the brief intro to the session. I'll present briefly our partnership between UNDP and CIRDI on the study of the PMCs, bringing cases from Argentina and then from Mozambique. Then we will hear Source International experience. So after Flaviano's presentation of this morning, he will go a bit deeper on his work in the field. And we will have the chance to discuss all together for around 20 minutes. Then we will Skype with Nancy Bahamonde, that I'll introduce you later on, who's an expert on PMCs in Peru. And finally, I'll bring a short case from Panama to end up discussing about the socioeconomic and environmental dimensions of the PMCs related work. To those who are following us online, on stream, hello. So we are using these two tweets, Development Sustainability Piece, that is the general tweet for the session, sorry, for the whole workshop. And for this session, we are using also PMC Stockholm session. So I have my phone here with me, and I'll be checking very often. If you have any comment, suggestion, whatever you want to say, please, you can feel free to use Twitter. So let me start with my presentation. I'll take just a very few minutes to speak about UNDP's research on this area and why monitoring committees' work is of interest for us. I'll specifically introduce you to the project I mentioned before, Participatory Environmental Governance for Sustainable Natural Resources Management in the Latin American and Caribbean region, that we are implementing in partnership with the Canadian International Resources and Development Institute, CIRDI, and the Latin American Dialogue Group. The delivery of a regional knowledge product that is outlined in this project, I'll explain you later, is undertaken as a component of the multi-year global program that you may already heard about, that is the EGP, the Environmental Governance Program funded by SIDA. So globally, as you know, the EGP supports and strengthens environmental governance within the mining industry in countries such as Colombia, Mongolia, Mozambique, and Kenya. I'll make a very brief introduction about UNDP's work on extractive industries and our position. So it is clear that the management of extractive sectors, being oil, gas, minerals, is a major challenge for developing countries. We all know that they can lead to exploitation, they can trigger violent conflicts, degrade the environment, worse gender and other inequalities. But on the other side, and in contrast to this, we see it as an opportunity too. There are plenty of cases where the effective management of a society's natural resources has unleashed sustainable and equitable human development. So based on the lessons learned upon those cases, I invite you to have a look at the UNDP's strategy released in 2013 to support the efforts of resource-rich developing countries to design and implement such policies, ensuring that wealth is transformed into advances in human development for all women and men. I I also invite you to have a look at this report about the third national conference on PMCs in mining, written by CERDI a couple of years ago, that explains how specifically participatory environmental monitoring committees are linked to SDGs and can help achieve them. So there is one target on goal 3, for instance, seeking to reduce by year 2030 the number of deaths and diseases caused by water pollution. In this regard, it is important to point out that intrinsically, the work of the committees on environmental monitoring has a health purpose, as for sure Flaviana will explain us later. And other targets that we all know are linked to environmental education, women participation in decision-making, sustainable management of water, or, as a final example, goal 16 aims at creating effective, transparent, and accountable institutions at all levels. We heard this from Claudia this morning. This reinforces the definition of committees as organization based on principles of transparency, participation, and representation. So the rationale behind this project comes from the search for solutions to the negative consequences of expansion of large-scale mining. Recent research on the frequency of reported conflict situations between mining companies and communities shows a worrying progressive increase in 2002 in Latin America. And this project is inspired by a previous experience from Peru, a sort of reaction in 2016, which enabled the creation of participatory environmental and social monitoring committees to prevent social conflicts that involve communities and mining companies. Today we know that more than 140 committees are active in Peru. Given promising results of those participatory committees in Peru, we want to better understand their work in other countries in Latin America in this year, in 2018. Our objectives of the ongoing research I'll present you are to identify the parameters and the contexts under which the PMCs can be created, to then provide examples of good practices. And since we are making this study in very different countries, we will share actionable policy and programming recommendations that can be somehow distributed or shared to other countries of the region. So consultants have been hired or are to be hired in Argentina, Bolivia, Panama, and Peru to produce one report based on 2 to 3 case studies per country. The case studies will be collected together and analyzed in a global report with analysis across all countries. And these findings will be verified at a regional dialogue with the participants in the study this October 2018 in Panama. The knowledge product will result in a deeper understanding of participatory environmental monitoring committees, and we will be very happy to share it with you. So there are many actors involved in this project, and I have tried to sort of bring them here with you. So Andrés Javier has recorded a short video that I will play right now. He's a PhD graduate from the Mining Engineering School at University of British Columbia and works for CERDI, one of our partners. CERDI was created in 2013 with the aim to supporting local and national governments from developing countries to strengthen their capacities in regard to natural resources management. And for the past 3 years, he's been leading a project on integrated water resources management in mining regions in Peru. Last October 2016, 2 years ago, CERDI and UNDP Peru carried out together a national event on the topic with almost 80 members from 22 participatory environmental monitoring committees. In this event, they even managed to sort of make a directory of other 44 environmental committees that they knew were active in the country. They realized how relevant would be to do research on the existence of those committees. It is a research that hasn't been done before as such. And they want to know the context and the reasons behind the success of these committees in the whole region. So in the coming video, I'll try to very briefly explain and help us understanding the methodology they have created and that will sort of guide our discussions today. They will focus on the internal governance of these PMCs, the learning, socioeconomic and environmental dimensions that surround them, and thus help them, or not, we will see, influence in the decision-making process. It is maybe important also to point out that this methodology will be equally, of course, used in each of the countries, and they will start. It is based on interviews with people from the communities, the committee, universities that might be working together with the committee, the enterprise, and the government. And after that, they will do focus groups to verify the results, and then come back to us with a report. So by the way, maybe the starting of the video is a bit abrupt. I'm very sorry, because we had been cutting the videos to make sure it was as dynamic as possible.
We looked into the literature to see what was said or being said about participatory monitoring initiatives. So we end up developing a preliminary guide or framework, which is structured in 4 components. Committees, they prepare and they start to organize themselves to be created. And then in this context, right after this initial preliminary organization, you start thinking of priorities, why you want to do this, and also a vision. Following that step, you obviously conduct the monitoring activities and then identify and collect the results, and there's a process of communication. So you shared the results that you found with different relevant groups and communities of interest. And depending the results, or regardless the results, there is a follow-up mechanism that you need to have. So therefore, clear components. And obviously, this is not in abstract. This is not in a vacuum. This is in a context. And the context that we also identified, obviously participatory monitoring, they are doing environmental monitoring. There's a socioeconomic piece that is important to understand. So this helps also to understand what the communities are and where they are coming from. We realized, and this was very clear during the event in October, and different interactions that we have had with members of those committees, the importance of a continuous learning mechanism. And all of that needs to be embedded in a space where transparency and accountability exist. So we call governance or internal governance of the committees. So questions that drove those components is the longevity of a committee. Why a committee exists for 10, 15 years? Why others, they don't last that long? So we have hints of internal governance challenges that may be influencing the life of the continuity of these participatory monitoring initiatives. I want to finish with 4 quick comments. One, that is very clear to me that this exercise, the importance of this exercise, because it will allow us to have a better understanding of the challenges and opportunities related to participatory monitoring in the context of Latin America. I'm also very excited because as we are closing, or will be closing this project with a regional workshop where I believe for the first time different groups from different countries will be coming together to share their experiences. So that exchange is really an added value for the project. Obviously, this process of peer learning.
Well, thank you. I actually see that Andre is online, and I want to thank him because it is 4 a.m. in the morning in Vancouver. So if you have questions for him regarding the methodology or anything else, you can ask him. He's online. He's sending me WhatsApp messages, and he will answer through WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever. So we are in touch with him. Good morning, Andre. Okay, let me follow by explaining you briefly the first results we have gathered from this research. So before coming here, I interviewed the consultants that are hired for the research. I have to insist on the fact that this is an ongoing research at the point that today, Gachi and Ana Cabria, the team we have hired in Argentina, is visiting one of the mining places, Sales de Jujuy. And that's why, actually, unfortunately, they are not online because they are very far away. So I'll briefly explain, let's say, the main features or the curiosities, the curious facts about the case studies that I have identified through their experiences. This is Sales de Jujuy. So actually, in Argentina, the two case studies that we are focusing on are in the border with Chile, as you can see. Sales de Jujuy is there, and the next case study I will explain you is here in San Miguel de Tucumán. So this case study, Sales de Jujuy, is located in the so-called lithium triangle that concentrates 75% of lithium reserves in the world. The enterprise is just starting, the activities of exploitation. The region is very poor, mainly populated by indigenous people. There's not a committee as such, because they were explaining me that this is due to the difficulties for having access to the mining zone. There are, as I was telling you, as of yesterday in the zone, and they don't expect to find a committee as such, but they know that the enterprise has a very strong CSR program named Shared Value with the communities. This is a program that fosters entrepreneurship through microcredits amongst the members of the community since the early stages of exploration. It has a very strong education component and has been recently awarded by the Inter-American Development Bank for the good relationship and links they maintain with the community surrounding the area. Through this program, the engineering faculty of Jujuy provides capacity building for the communities, who are often hired by the enterprise to carry out environmental monitoring. So it is the enterprise who facilitates transport to the members of the community, who are, however, not always the same group of people carrying out the controls and are unpaid for their work. In a way, most families from the communities are somehow linked to the mining site now. They depend directly or indirectly on the enterprise's activity. This seems to be an ideal case coming from CSR activities, but in a way, Gachi and Ana want to check whether this influence of the mining enterprise may also undermine the community's capacity to deal with the protection of their social and environmental rights, as well as their independence when doing the monitoring. So now going southern to the second case study from Argentina. This is Minera Abajo de la Lumbrera, the biggest open-air gold mine constructed at that moment in Argentina. It is now in its closing phase. This is a very polemic case. To mention just one of the causes of conflict there, studies made between 2000 and 2003 showed that respiratory illnesses had doubled within the population in those 3 years. And in 2012, more recently, a terrible spill affected water quality. So the community decided to organize themselves and to create what they have called a community transparency system, whose mission has been evolved since 2012 until now. At the beginning, in 2012, they organized themselves in roundtables for discussion. So they set up these roundtables with the mining representatives and technical advisors from whom they wanted to get advice. Auditors, geologists, engineers. And the members of this group were also environmental activists. So the aim of the group was to discuss and to document facts. For what? In order to build trust with the community. Monitoring started in 2012 by a very broad group of people in Concepción. More than 100 people were involved in the process of monitoring. However, as Anna and Gachi were explaining to me about this case study, this is a very, very informal group. There is no planning whatsoever in terms of the meetings frequency. It is only activated when the leader of this big committee comes from Buenos Aires, and he's actually a sort of external figure. He owns his own NGO called Ecoconciencia. And his travels might be financed sometimes by the enterprise, sometimes by his own NGO, and other times by himself. So the group used to enter and visit the mining zone, and together with the enterprise, they even created an early warning system and carried out water and soil monitoring. Anna was telling me also that some members of these committees were then seen by their colleagues from the environmental activism area as friends or accomplices with the enterprise, and then were rejected by the environmental associations they used to work with. So, well, they were also telling me this anecdote that the group is so informal that they were once denounced by an environmental activist on the radio for choosing the sampling points where they take the samples of water or soil without having consulted the community. So apparently the NGO representative I was talking to you about called back the radio station and asked live about where they considered that those sampling points should be. And the ones that were suggested in the radio station are now taken into account and became part of the list. So communication to the community on the results is informal as well, depending on the relevance. If a spillover, like the one in 2012, is very big, they use big media. Other times they barely communicate. She was telling me that they use WhatsApp as their mean of communication of the results. So in this regard, they were telling me that they think that the majority of the community doesn't even know about the existence of this monitoring committee, even if they are sensitive to these issues. The enterprise will keep on producing, even if they are in mine closure, in the mine closure phase, but at a lesser level. And the new community group is nowadays interested in building a committee to monitor the mine closure, this time in partnership with the state and the mining company. At this stage, what the community is denouncing, and the committee, sorry, is denouncing, is the fact that they don't have a proper laboratory where they can analyze the results. And actually, in the zone, the best laboratory belongs to the enterprise. But they hired the same scientists from universities that are hired by the community. So no independence is somehow guaranteed. From the PMC's members, the big absent stakeholder, what they think is the big absent is the state. However, this is curious, and we will see it also in the Panama cases. The state does monitoring every 3 to 6 months, but the access to information is very hard to get and not accessible. They might publish it online on a website or send it straight to the enterprise. So, through these 2 case studies, we can identify already some challenges we can discuss about later on. The absence of the state, the communication results issues that helps building trust and ensures transparency, and the fact of making sure that the community is aware of the existence of the committees as such, so that they are legitimized, but also accountant to the community that they represent. This is something we can discuss later on. I will now, before giving the floor to Flaviano, we will watch another video from Mozambique. So our next presenter is Josimar Biose. Josimar works at the National Agency for Environmental Quality Control staff in Mozambique, and he's a member of the Environmental Governance Program Working Group in Mozambique. So in the following video that he has very kindly recorded for us, and I know he's also following us online, he will explain briefly why and how they are planning to create the first pilot PMC in a conflicting area of the country. Sorry, I have to find it.
Hello, Stockholm. Hope you're doing just fine out there. Here in Mozambique, we are in the cold season, but I'm sure it's not as cold as Stockholm. There's no way of comparison. So I'm Josimar Biasa from the Environmental Agency in Mozambique, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of our project within the EGP program related to community-based environmental monitoring. So the first question, why are we running this project? Because environmental issues in mining activities are, what do I have to say, a serious issue. And in the place that we chose to develop this pilot community-based environmental monitoring is a conflict area. You see, we're talking about the province of Tete in a district called Moatize, where some 3 to 4 medium to large scale mining activities are going on. And social media, TVs, radio, even the parliament have shown us that there are serious problems, serious environmental problems there in Moatize caused by mining activities. And the communities, definitely, the communities are not happy. These environmental problems involve air pollution, noise, ground vibration, water pollution, and so. So what is our main objective with this project? We want to strengthen capacities, tools, knowledge for community-based environmental monitoring with a human rights-based approach of mining activities. What will be our expected outcomes? We want to see the communities empowered. We want to see the communities' resilience strengthened. We want to see the human rights monitored and abuses prevented. We want also to prevent companies' misconduct. The community's internal communication will be strengthened, and there will be strengthened knowledge among the communities about the use of pollution measurement equipment, and of course good environmental practice will be promoted within these communities. We are targeting this one community there, but we are planning to expand to another 2 provinces. Province of Manica, there's a lot of gold mining there, heavy sands in a province called Nampula, and these 4 parameters will be monitored. We're talking about air, soil, water, and human rights will be monitoring. And in each community, we would like to train at least 12 to 15 persons, so they are able to conduct by themselves this monitoring job.
Well, thank you. Josimar is also online and ready for your questions if you want to ask him anything. Now I give the floor to Flaviano, who will talk about his work in Source International. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alexandra, and good afternoon to everybody. So this session is meant to be a little bit like a continuation of what we saw this morning, but it will be also like a continuation of what Josimar just said. So going a little bit deeper, what is exactly a monitoring system? So we have seen from this morning and now how the monitoring system can prevent the conflict. In the case of Bajo la Lumbrera, it was Alexandra was talking. It's a clear-cutting example of how the community monitoring, active community monitoring, can resolve a conflict. Conflict was triggered by an opening of a mining without taking into consideration the local communities. But what is exactly the monitoring? So what can we monitor really? What are the major concerns? First of all, is the question that we have to ask to ourselves is, what are the major concerns? Why there are conflicts? Why the conflict rise? And the points are pretty much often the same. Water is probably the main one. Local communities are afraid about water, both in terms of quantity and quality. Air, health issues, land tenure, and then human rights. And all of these aspects is something that can be monitored. That's something that can be measured. Can be measured at a very high level, top level from university investigation center, but can be measured also by community members at a very grassroots level. So let's start with water. And as I said, in water, there's two different things that we can monitor, the quantity and the quality. First of all, the community can monitor the quantity of water. This is not something so complicated. It's not actually the easiest thing in the world, but it's something that is doable. The perfect instrument, like you have to understand how much water passes through a river, and the community might be able to know exactly how much water goes into the river, how much is the flow, in order to understand how, if this flow is reducing or is increasing or whatever. I mean, the ideal instrument would be something like that. And it is very expensive and it's out of the reach of most of communities. But you can also, on 90% of the rivers, when you're done speaking about huge rivers, you can always measure the distance between the 2 points of the river and kind of map the depth of the river. For example, like in this case, like if you measure like every meter, for example, and then you can have a estimation of basically the area of the water flow, and then you have, of course, to measure the quantity of water, so the speed basically of the water going into every session, and you can do it with a very easy instrument like this one. We have communities in Peru and Guatemala and even Mongolia that are using this type of instrument. It's pretty easy. It's not really expensive. It's something that you can buy with total of less than $5,000. So it's not probably the cheapest thing ever, but it's doable if you have a bit of support. And then at the end, you can measure the quantity of water in several points, upstream and downstream the mine or the activities. Like this one is what came out at the very end. Those are real data of a river in Guatemala where we have a mine after the 0.6, well, the mine is a bit spread between the 0.6 and the 0.7, and you can see that there is a strong decrease of water. So, and those are 10 measurements that were made by the community. So it's the community itself with the community groups, the monitoring groups that goes to the river once a month, and they measure in 10 different points that are always the same. They measure the quantity of water. So they know exactly how much water they have, how much water is taken by the mine, how much water is taken by agriculture, how much water is taken for their own activities. And this is kind of strong case. In some other case, the reduction of water is less, and therefore the community is able to negotiate the use of water with the company. And then, of course, quality. That is the second biggest triggers. In my experience, the huge triggers of conflicts are water quantity and water quality. Communities are afraid to remain without water for the agriculture and to have polluted water. But all those parameters, pH, conductivity, temperature, oxygen, heavy metals, and anions, are all parameters that can be measured at a community level with some cheap and easy to use instrument, so that the community can monitor every week, for example, the quality of the water and therefore control what is happening into the river. I won't go that much in deep in what are these. pH measure the acidity of the water, conductivity basically measure the quantity of elements that are dissolved into the water, and therefore is a very good indication of possible alteration of the water. Temperature we all know, and we also know that temperature can rise in case of a spill or in case of other process that can happen into a mine, like the acid rock drainage, oxygen, and heavy metals and everything. You can basically do it with some very easy to use and cheap instrument. This one measures pH, conductivity, temperature. It's something that costs $500, and everybody can learn how to use it. You have just to measure a dip of dip the sensor into the water and measure. That's a number basically coming out, so you can see if the number. Of course, the number is no. If you have a pH 8, for example, it's not always 8. It might fluctuate between 7.5 and 8.2 or 8.3. But if one day you go there and you see that it's 4, then there's something wrong. Then you remeasure again, and it's 4 again. Then it may be that something is wrong. This is in Mexico, in the mountains of Guerrero. It's a very remote area, and this one is in Mongolia, in Ovorkangai, another remote area. It's the same instrument, actually, same brand. That we used in 2 different places. And then we have like the upgrade instrument is this one. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex, but this one measures also oxygen and salinity, so you can also see other parameters. And then there are, again, going a step ahead again, some instruments that definitely measure directly some elements, like this one. With this instrument, you can basically measure even some metals. With this one, for example, you can measure in a quantitative issues the lead in water. So of course, this the accurability, the preciseness of those instruments is not the same one of the major laboratory and universities. But at a community level, it's something that can be done, and the data are reliable. So you cannot go to 0.001 ppm of lead, but if the concentration are pretty high, you can measure with this one. And then some other instruments that are actually even cheaper and easier to use are, for example, only qualitative and not quantitative. Like this is one of our partners, it's Sinogard. Their organization, they produce this. This is like, it's big like this. It costs less than $1. And then you just have to put a few drops of water into the, I don't know how to define it. It's like a plastic container. You put a few drops, 1 milliliter of water, and if it changes color, that means that there is cyanide. Otherwise, there is not. So we all know that in gold mining, for example, cyanide is a big issue, and spills of cyanide can be very dangerous. We all remember the spill of cyanide of the Romanian Baia Mare in 2000 that basically killed the entire Danube River in Romania. That's like one of the most famous. But I mean, cyanide is one of the major concerns at community level. And with this instrument, the community can monitor every week or even every day, because it really costs per issues like 50 cents or something like that. So the community can organize even a daily monitoring. There is cyanide? No. Okay, we drink. There is cyanide? Yes. Okay. First of all, we don't drink this water. Second, we go to the company and ask. Then there is the third point, is like the last step. It's to ship the samples to the laboratory. So it's when you see that there is something wrong, for example, we said temperature. Let's take something very easy. If the temperature change, it might be that something has changed, but what? Because it might even be simply that it was more sun. So, but if you see that there is a trend in changing temperature, then you can take a bottle and put some preservative and ship it to the lab. And then we, as Source International, we have labs, and we can then analyze with the best instruments of the world and all the detail of what is inside the water, heavy metals, all kind of heavy metals, cyanide or whatever. After water, another big issue is air pollution, and specifically, more than air, is especially in dry area, is dust. Mining issues, the mine produce a lot of dust. That's especially when the area is very dry. And this is the instrument that we mostly use. This is a pump that basically simulates a lung. So this breathes 4 liters per minute. That is the average of what we breathe when we are doing like normal life. And up there, it's called IOM. It's a 2 0.5 centimeters filter that is basically simulate the nose and the mouth. So basically you can measure how much dust goes into your lung over a certain time. So you put the pump there, for example, for 8 hours, 9 hours, and you can use it in 2 different ways. In this example, for example, is a station. So we put there and we leave there for 12 hours and wait. And so we measure how much dust is in that point. And another system that we can use, and we use it a lot, especially with underground mines, is to put on a person. Because you can put the small pump on your belt and clip your IOM here, for example, and then go into the mine and work for 12 hours. And when you come back, you take the filter, and that's the exactly amount of dust that you breathe into the mine. And that's very useful to understand, to prevent, basically, because you can measure the dust before that there is a damage. So if you are breathing too much iron, for example, or carbon or silica, well, specific elements, then it's very dangerous for your lungs. So before you get sick, we can know it. And then we get to the next point, the health monitoring, because health is at the end the major issue. The people are afraid to be, the water is polluted and they are dust because they are afraid to get sick. So in there, again, we work on the 2 different levels. The first one is like, for example, here we are in Honduras, and this picture is in Peru, where we basically taking hair samples to measure the bioaccumulation of heavy metals into the body of the people. So if there is lead, for example, in the water and in the soil, then at the end it's going to end up on your body, highly probably. And therefore, that's why we measure on the hair the bioaccumulation of metals or other pollutant. But also specific illnesses like kidney disease. It's something that is very, very relevant, because normally it's one of the first issues that comes out when there is pollution, especially on water pollution, because at the end it's the kidney that has to filtrate all the pollutant. And so this is a case in Guatemala in which we realized that there were a lot of kidney problems, especially dialysis, into the community. And then we ended up that we discovered that was caused by in that case, with the pesticide of an agrobusiness activities nearby. And then the social monitoring. So it is very important also the perception that the community has over the impact of the mine. So, for example, community mapping. This is Cerro de Pasco in Peru. We have seen pictures this morning, and a couple of pictures was before. And this is how the community perceive their area. So, and there is also like the red and the black represent the areas that, according to the community, is dangerous. So the area where they don't want their kids to go to play, for example. So they put the mine in the middle, and then the blue area is the area where they live, and then the black is the area where they don't want the kids to go, and also the red. But this is very important, is the perception, but then a step further is the measurement, the exact measurement. So how do you measure that area? A GPS today, it costs $150, and it's easy to use, and you can give it to communities, and they can measure actually the point in which they don't want to access. And this is also another thing that we can use for the land. Now, the tenure of land, I won't go in deep in the tenure of land because we can discuss until the day after tomorrow. It's a very sensible issue. Very often communities doesn't have a real property of the land. So the mine basically buy the license, and they get the license to operate into an area that is not technically owned by the community, but is maybe used by the community since years. And especially when we talk about indigenous communities, it might be even thousands of years that they are using that land, but they don't have a real property of land. So community mapping, and that, in that case, is very useful also if you do it before the activities. It's very, very important. And from one side, it's important to the traditional ownerships or the traditional voice messages on which they say that that land is used, but then it's also very important to measure with GPS and takes points and put in a map so that one day, if there is a concession, you know that that land has been used for years before. And then the least but not last, as Joao Samar was saying, measuring human rights. This is also something I won't go very deep because it takes very long time and I'm already running out of time. But human rights impact assessment is a tool that basically involves communities in the measurements of their own human rights. So like rights to life, right to water, right to education. We've done a huge study in Cerro de Pasco, for example, over the rights of education. So how the kids have the rights to education because the school doesn't have water, and then therefore they have to stop in the middle of the lessons. And when there is explosions of the mine, they have to evacuate the school for 1 hour because every morning at noon there is the blasting. So at 10 to noon, the kids go out from the school, they have to go in another place and come back 15 minutes later because it's dangerous. So how this affects, for example, their rights to education and the rights to well-being and all those kinds of rights. And that is probably the most long in terms of time because it requires a lot of time. You need to talk with people, you need to go out with the communities, you need to stay with them. This is Repasco, this is Mongolia. You need to really spend time with them. The last thing is communication and transparency. This is a key issue for a monitoring system to be effective. The monitoring committee, when Joao Samar was saying we want to train 12 to 15 persons, there is a huge risk that those 12 to 15 persons are identified from the community as like separate to them, or even as like a privileged group of people that somehow have a job through the mine or through the activities. So it is very, very important that everything is done with a major transparency and communicating everything outside. So the committee, for example, can go and monitoring water every week, but then once every 2 or 3 months, they have to share this with the community. This is Carrizalillo in Mexico, in the state of Guerrero. And this is the committee. Those guys that you see in the middle are the 6 person of the monitoring committee. And every 6 months, one during dry season and one during wet season, they organize a field trip with all the community, all together. So in that case, we were like 300 person up to the edge of the mine. So seeing the mine down, taking samples together, explain what they are doing. And that's basically the way in which they show what they are doing. But it's also important the communication day by day. And Alexandra was mentioning before, the radio, community radio is the most powerful instrument. And this is Cerro de Pasco, and there was this issue of a community space every Monday morning in which the community, the monitors go there for 1 hour and speak what they have done the week before, and they receive calls and they speak about the impacts and what they do, what they don't do, and things like that. And we have seen how it's important, how it is relevant even in Bajo la Lumbrera. One important thing is that when we do community monitoring, we don't have to think, I mean, we have to think in the way in which they communicate that is not necessarily the way in which we communicate. Like, for example, in Carrizalillo, there's no phone connection. It's a community, one of the few remaining in the world where you don't have phone connection, therefore you don't have internet. So you cannot think to tweet out your results. Nobody will read it unless someone go out from the community. So community radio, it's super powerful instrument. Sometimes even older school, like just sign outside the church, because it's the place where everybody goes, at least on Sunday. So we have to think to communicate in their own way for the internal communication. But then it's also important to have the external communication, so put it on a web page and spread all over the world so that other people can, why not, copy it and enlarge the impacts. Done. 20 seconds later. Good.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Flaviano. I would like to open the floor for any question or comments you may have. I already received one from Andre, but maybe I would like to hear from you first. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, I'll read. Sorry. So please, just introduce briefly yourself and before asking the question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophie and I work in NORAD. And I'm wondering about this whole issue about transparency. Because it's very popular now. Everything is supposed to be transparent, and you're seeing contracts and everything of the operations. But still, you see that there's sort of a limit to how that translates into action in the population. So I'm wondering, sort of, you know, normal people, they have a day job. And there's also a limit to how much they can engage with very technical issues. So how do we overcome that in a way? If you have any comments.
Well, for example, in our committees, we always try to have a bigger group, and then they have to monitor in a smaller group. Like, clear example. In Carrizalillo, Mexico, there are 8 monitors, and they have to go at least 2 person every week, so that basically they go once a month. So they have a daylight job, of course, a daily job, but if they organize well among themselves, they just have to miss 1 Monday every month. So it's not that everybody has to go the entire Monday every Monday, because it's impossible. I mean, there are normal people. I mean, that's possible only if you pay them a salary, but then they become professional, and then they become can be a sort of conflict internal at the community. So you organize a bigger group, and then you try to share the responsibility all over everybody, so that, and we say that you have to go in 2 is like, because it's always better to go around in 2, you know, you never know, you just broke a leg and you cannot back. So always 2, we tend to avoid to be only 1 person. But yeah, if you train, as Josima would say, 12 to 15 people every community, and let's say you say they have to go there in 2 or 3, it's not a huge job. So.
Yeah, you have also sometimes to make sure you can pay them, because what happens sometimes is that otherwise you cannot find someone that is available or agrees to lose 1 day of work because he or she has to go monitoring. I have a... There's another question? Ah, wow.
6, 7.
Okay, the closest one.
Hi, I'm Kate Sullivan with the Global Challengers Foundation. I wonder how PEMCs are coordinated with other national and global governance structures to bring together kind of the local up with the larger agendas like the Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, they are normally kind of coordinated at least to a national level, and Peru is a good example of this. So in Peru, there's kind of a national coordination over this kind of monitoring groups. In some other countries are not, honestly, and so, but the final goal is to have at least a recognition from the government and possibly also the company. So in some cases, it just started, like the one in Carrizalillo that we have seen in several pictures. It just started from the community by itself, and then it developed. Then after a couple of years, the government jump on board, and then also the company, because they were seeing that it was working. So I think it's a good trigger to, if there is not a coordination, it's a good trigger to start it.
It's something very interesting we can also see with Nancy now in the Skype we are organizing in Peru, because actually public authorities train, in the case of Peru, the monitoring committees so that they meet their standards, the public standards, when they're doing the monitoring. I will come back to this question also when explaining the case of Panama, because for instance we are studying one case study that is where the mining is in the zone of the Canal of Panama. So for the strong interest, of course, the government has in maintaining the zone, in respecting the environment, they are the ones, the authority of the canal are the ones who are training the PMCs and who organize them, not only for the enterprise as such, but for the whole zone of the basin. So they have their own early warning system, they have their own kits, they are very well prepared thanks to this partnership, thanks to the government initiative. Any other question in this side? Okay, I'll go here. Sorry, I don't know.
Thank you. My name is Marianne Chalén. I work with the United Nations Development Program, but with other programs on water governance. Actually, I have 3 questions, but just also on this on the committees. I'm sort of also it relates to the previous question. Like, how related are they? Are they like single-purpose committees that are formed for this, or are they like, you know, parent association or health committees that sort of take this on? Sort of like in the insertion in the community. And I'm struck by, I think it looks very systematic and sort of scientific, the things that are being monitored. And I'm just wondering, what is the role of just like, you know, smell, color of water, or just observation? Is that like recorded? And also in the communication, or I would say maybe analysis, how much discussion is there about, like, you know, guidelines, like what is a high level of, well, I guess cyanide is just presence or not, but some things like, you know, are there guidelines, and are these values related to that in the communication also, and or permits maybe?
Okay, you can leave that mic there and we can use this one. Huh?
Okay.
Anyway, the first question, it depends a lot. Sometimes there's already a structure and then the committee came out from the structure, like parents association or whatever. Sometimes it's created ad hoc. I would say it's most common the first one, and normally it's an organization of, especially Latin America, it's an organization of farmers, so a group of campesinos that they have this. Then the committee starts from them. As for the color, this is all recorded. So in the sheets, it's normally the first thing you go and you sign on your field sheet. The color, the odor, your perception. So this is very important too. Now I try to be short, but especially and when you work with indigenous groups and their own perception of like forestry and things like that. So it goes a little bit in parallel. They have this traditional knowledge from one side that is respected, and on the other side you have like a more scientific approach. And the third question was. Oh yeah, of course there are several guidelines all over the world. Every country has their own guidelines, and then there are World Bank, and then there are the IRMA standards. There are a lot of standards around, and you ignore WHO. So you normally try to relate to the one that is more relevant. Normally it's the national one, but we also use a lot the WHO standards, so the World Health Organization, because they are more safe generally, and more complete, and it's also easier for us to compare with different countries because it's all the same all over the world. So it's kind of easier than instead of matching every country. But you can report to every. It also depends which is your goal. If your goal is to go to the national authorities, then you have to refer to the national level. But if your goal is to go more global, then you refer to something more global, like WHO, for example.
Just for the first question you raised, in the case of Panama, we will see, for instance, that some of the members of the committee that has just been formed come from organizations that were controlling the use of water before. They are they call themselves as the water defenders. Something that we are also identifying in this case study is that most of the committees do not identify themselves as environmental monitoring committees. They are called transparency system, the water defenders, or any other terms. But the word or name is not so commonly used. So yes, they were chosen by the community from people that was already working in the control of the use of water in the zone. I will take just one more question, but keep yours just for after the Skype, because we can have a chat with Nancy, we can ask her questions as well, and we will have time for debate again after the Skype. So just one more question and then we Skype with Nancy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maria Torres Gustafsson and I'm from Stockholm University. I've been working with extractive governance in Peru for several years. And I just have 2 questions because I've been working with similar processes in Peru as well. So first, I wonder about when you look at the community level, it's just the first step when you have this evidence. And I mean, it's extremely important, the work that you do, really, given the asymmetry of access to information in the extractive industries. So, but just, I mean, like when you get the evidence, how do you ensure the compliance of the companies? You need, what kind of strategies do you use there? Because it's so easy just to initiate a negotiation about compensations for environmental contamination that doesn't really change anything in environmental. And then the other question, you were talking about this in terms of strategy for resolving conflicts. So I would just like to look at it from a little bit different perspective, because some of the work that I've been doing by myself and my colleagues have been working with is how local communities in many cases try to use these processes to appropriate them to their own ends, and in some cases to initiate conflicts with the companies. And I'm just thinking about the case of Cajamarca, for example, in Peru, and in many other cases how local communities try to use similar processes like the participation in environmental impact assessments or prior consultations. That should they really be seen as processes of conflict resolution, or more in terms of right protection, or articulating other interests in terms of long-term development?
Okay, so for the first question, that's the second part of my presentation that I canceled because I have no time. So how to use the strategy. So of course, that's a big issue. I mean, you can do all the monitoring that you want, but then if you don't have a response on the other side, that's pretty useless. So, but if you don't have if you put the other way around, if you don't have the data, then you cannot start even a negotiation, or you cannot even knock at the door. I mean, you can, but then they ask, what do you want? I don't know, you know. So the first step is like having knowledge, having data, and then try to obtain something. And that's normally it depends case to case, but I can generalize in a few steps. The first step is try to have a direct negotiation. So a negotiation table, so go to the company and the government and say, we found that there is lead in the water. Let's sit on a table and negotiate a mitigation plan, for example. If they don't do, then you can try with some more national or international advocacy. So you maybe call a journalist and say, oh, we have lead in the water, and then internationally, and then the last resort is a lawsuit. But normally, when I started to do this job 12 years ago, was pretty common that the door will slam out of you and you get out, and then you have to go to lawsuit and takes ages and money and everything. I see today that there is a change. Companies tend to, especially from a company side, not from the government, but from a company side, they tend to negotiate more. They prefer to have a dialogue instead of going into something that might be more costed for them, especially on the image also side. As on the second point, I think that monitoring system is a conflict mitigation, not a conflict prevention. If you use it when the conflict is already there. So cases like Cajamarca, if you see from a broader perspective, the conflict was already there, but because of Yanacocha before. So Conga is like a second step, and the conflict was already there if you take the whole province, for example, instead of seeing the whole communities. If you can start from the beginning, in that case, it's a conflict mitigation. And then we have a case in Puebla, in Mexico, where we start before the first mine arrive in the region. So we start with a baseline study, human rights impact assessment from the beginning. In that case, there was the real result was a mitigation of the conflicts. So the conflict didn't rise up at all. If the conflict is already there, then you can use it for kind of mitigate the conflict because you have something on the community side. Otherwise, let's take again the case of Cajamarca. If you don't have nothing on your end, you get even more angry, and then the conflict is even more higher. You know, it's a higher level. I mean, so it also depends at which stage you arrive with community monitoring. Ideally, you arrive way before everything starts. But this is not an ideal world. We have 39 projects and only 3 times we'll be able to start before. All the 36 times, we start when the problem is already there, when the conflict is already triggered. So you can also use you can only use for mitigate and not to avoid at that point.
Thank you, Flaviano. Well, let me introduce you now to Nancy Bahamonde, who we are calling now on Skype and to whom you can ask all the questions you may have. Nancy is a consultant on conflict prevention at the Mining and Sustainable Dialogue Group based in Peru, and she's been hired to do research on 3 case studies in Peru. She will briefly introduce you to these case studies, and then we will have around 10 minutes to ask her questions. Nancy is not fluent in English, so I'll be doing the interpretation of languages from English into Spanish and vice versa. Okay, now please, fingers crossed for this to work. It worked 1 hour ago, so it's really working now. And then have around 10 minutes to ask her questions. Nancy is fluent in English, so I'll be doing the interpretation of languages from English into Spanish.
Sí, sí, estoy aquí, okay, Alexandra.
Mira, quita por favor el streaming, ciérralo, porque si no se oye la voz detrás.
Lo cierro, ok, lo cierro.
Claro.
Ok, ya está.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Nancy. I'm thanking her for being here with us. So I told the public, he dicho al público que vas a presentar brevemente tus casos de estudio. No sé si, no te vemos en el vídeo, no sé si vas a ponerlo.
A ver, un momentito. ¿Ahí está bien? ¿Me ven?
A ver, ahora funcionará. Sí, yes, we can see you, Nancy. So, sí, muy brevemente, si puedes introducir a los casos de estudio y yo te voy traduciendo.
Bien, en el Perú estamos haciendo 3 estudios, uno del Comité de Monitoreo de JUPROG, que está ubicado en la zona de influencia de Antamina, y otras 2 de Buenaventura, una que está en Orcopampa, ¿no?, que es zona de operación, el comité se instaló ya en zona de operación, y el otro en Mayay, Lima, que se inició en etapa de exploración.
Okay, so the 3 case studies she's analyzing are one that is in JUPROG in the zone of Antamina and 2 others in Buenaventura. One is in Orcopampa in the phase, already in the operational phase, and the other one is in Mayay in Lima where she's starting the exploration phase.
Sí, efectivamente. Actualmente estos comités están trabajando. La particularidad de Antamina es que se inició con la instalación de una mesa de diálogo por percepciones de afectación. Tenían una mesa para hacer un enfoque de cuenca. Luego se ha reducido a una mesa un poco más chica, un comité un poco más chico de 3 zonas, de Chipta, de 5 troncos y JUPRO. Se están haciendo monitoreos con el apoyo de la universidad. La particularidad de este comité es que tienen en la Secretaría Técnica a la Universidad Nacional de Antunes de Mayolo de Ancash.
Vale, voy traduciendo esto. So, the first case study of JUPROG in Antamina started through a dialogue table with a focus or a sort of approach based on the whole basin. Okay, or watershed. Okay, sorry. However, and well, this is not she hasn't said that before, but it's something we have discussed. Because sometimes the people from the local governments didn't agree on how to monitor. In this case, only 3 zones of the whole watershed are working together. And the particularity of this case study is that the monitoring is carried out through the technical help of the university. And the technical secretariat is held by the university. Gracias, Nancy. Dime, sigue.
En el caso de Orcopampa, la Secretaría Técnica la tiene una ONG, Labor, ¿no?, que hace la capacitación a los monitores ambientales y donde se nota también mayor participación de las mujeres, ¿no?, que están monitoreando y están ya en otro nivel, quizá un poco más avanzado, porque también cierta participación del Estado, en este caso de la autoridad local del agua, ¿no?, de Arequipa. Ellos tienen el apoyo también de la municipalidad, cuyo alcalde es el presidente del comité de monitoreo.
Okay. So in the case of Orcopampa, the technical secretariat is held by Labor, that is a third NGO, a third party, and that provides technical support and training for the people that are part of the monitoring committee. There are more women than usually in this monitoring committee, and they have. There is a presence of the state and through the local authorities, and actually the president of the committee is the mayor. Sí, Nancy, gracias.
Sí. En el caso de Mayay, se inició en una etapa de exploración, lo cual permite hacer un seguimiento respecto a la línea de base, ¿no? Cómo se empezó y cómo la afectación puede estar dándose hasta el momento. En este caso, la Secretaría Técnica la tiene el Instituto del Diálogo, que bueno, es una sociedad con el Grupo de Diálogo, Minería y Desarrollo Sostenible. Están participando muy activamente en el caso de Mayay los centros educativos, lo cual ayuda mucho a trabajar también desde la base el tema de prevención de conflictos.
¿Los centros educativos de la zona y forman al comité?
Efectivamente, el centro educativo a través de la brigada ambiental, ¿no?, participa en las capacitaciones y también en el monitoreo ambiental. El último año de estudios, ¿no? Son la brigada ambiental del centro educativo del lugar.
Okay, so in the case of Mayay, they are in the phase of exploration. They're following the baseline, and the technical secretariat is held by the Dialogue Institute. Actually, education centers, are training the people that are part of this committee through their environment brigades, the so-called environment brigades, which helps preventing conflicts. Nancy, ¿puedo ya pasar a las preguntas?
Sí, efectivamente. Sí.
Okay, so she's ready for the questions you may have for her. Otherwise, I'll start with one. Okay. I'll ask Nancy about this in any case. So, Nancy, ella se estaba preguntando, o sea, estaba comentando un poco el tema de la cooperación con el sector privado. ¿Me oyes, verdad?
Sí.
De la cooperación con el sector privado y de cómo muchas veces también el sector privado ha colaborado mucho con la comunidad y ha ayudado a su evolución y a su desarrollo. Entonces, por ejemplo, ella estaba mencionando el ejemplo de un paquete de salud, ¿no?, proveído para evitar casos de SIDA o otro tipo de formaciones que provee el sector privado. ¿Tú en alguno de estos tres casos o en Perú conoces algún caso de éxito en el que una empresa haya colaborado tanto con la comunidad como para que ésta haya, o sea, avanzado enormemente o haya sido un ejemplo a nivel internacional?
Bueno, en el Perú, básicamente en los temas de comités de monitoreo, estos comités están formados por los tres actores, ¿no? En este caso es el Estado, es la comunidad, es la empresa. Básicamente, en cuanto a comités de monitoreo, obviamente la comunidad, perdón, la empresa minera está presente, ¿no?, contratando los laboratorios. Ahora, en cuanto a participación activa de alguna empresa minera que haya apoyado muchísimo, hay casos, pero no conozco muchos de estos, ¿no? Por lo general ellos se basan mucho en su tema de responsabilidad social, apoyan en lo que pueden. Obviamente hay lugares donde el Estado no llega y la empresa minera cubre muchos aspectos. Hay ejemplos pocos, pero sí las hay.
Okay. So I was asking her if she knows about any success stories of cooperation between the private sector and the environmental monitoring committees in Peru. And she was saying that the three actors are present in the work of the monitoring committees in Peru, the three of them, the state, the communities, and the enterprises. And the way they collaborate the most with the monitoring committees are through the use of their own laboratories. And also in the cases that sometimes through their programs of CSR, they cover aspects that should be aspects regulated by policies, but they are many in places where the state cannot reach geographically. So they actually sometimes act as the state in terms of social policies. Is there any other question for her? Yes. So may you give him the microphone? Sorry. Thank you. Because otherwise she cannot. Yeah.
Yes. Hello. My name is Olof Sandström. I work with the Geological Survey in Sweden. My question is: do you see any changes through these community actions and the results from these? Are there any changes in, for instance, government's legislations? And are there any changes in, for instance, EIAs as a result from these actions? Is there any impact?
Ok, Nancy, este señor nos pregunta si a través de tu experiencia con los comités de monitoreo ambiental has visto que ellos hayan tenido el poder de modificar las leyes o de modificar las políticas del gobierno, o por ejemplo los estudios de impacto ambiental.
Bueno, los estudios de impacto ambiental aquí en el Perú se reciben a través del SENACE, ¿no? Y obviamente ahí, cuando la empresa minera quiere hacer sus modificaciones, debe hacer una audiencia pública. Hay casos en los que sí, pues han cambiado varias veces sus estudios de impacto ambiental, lo cual provoca cierto malestar en la población, ¿no? Porque las audiencias se hacen o muy rápidas o las comunidades no las entienden, ¿no? Son tomos, volúmenes muy grandes de estos estudios de impacto ambiental que no siempre se presenta pues en una forma accesible a la comunidad, lo cual provoca ese tipo de conflictividad, ¿no? Sí han habido cambios de estudios de impacto ambiental. En el caso de los comités de monitoreo, básicamente lo que se trata es de hacer una vigilancia o un monitoreo de aguas, de la calidad de aguas o de aire o de suelo. En el caso, por ejemplo, de Jupro, que es de aire y de aguas, Orcopampa y Mayay es agua, ¿no? Entonces, lo que se trata es de hacer un seguimiento a su estudio de impacto ambiental y de qué manera está afectando esto, la explotación del mineral o la etapa de explotación, ¿no? Entonces, para eso se les prepara a los monitores para que ellos conozcan cuando digamos, un parámetro no está bien y cómo es que a través del diálogo se puede conversar con la empresa minera y bueno, si es que hay que inclusive, porque esto se socializa con los organismos fiscalizadores, cómo es que se puede corregir si es que hubiera alguna afectación, ¿no?
Gracias. Okay, so what she was explaining is that the EIAs, the Environmental Impact Assessments, are made through the SENACE. ¿Qué es el SENACE?
SENACE es la ventanilla única por donde ingresan todos los estudios de impacto ambiental de las mineras, ¿no?
Okay,
o también hidrocarburos.
Okay, so it's the institution that receives all the EIAs from the country. And so actually, when the enterprise wants to modify the environmental impact assessment, they are obliged to do so through public consultations. However, what she was explaining is that those public consultations sometimes are very much criticized because they criticize that they might be done either too quickly or without prior advice, and that sometimes people do not understand those who come to present how the modifications might be done because they don't understand the data or they don't understand exactly what they want from them. So sometimes it might be even a source of conflict with the communities. So she was also explaining that the monitoring committees monitor water, air, and soil, and they follow these environmental impact assessments that affect, for instance, in the case of Juprog, the exploitation stage. So the people that is trained, they are trained to know if the parameters that they are measuring are not okay, and then they have direct access to the audit authorities to correct the problem. So they have direct access to the government authorities to try to modify the situation. Gracias, Nancy. Voy a coger si hay una pregunta más, porque vamos un poquito mal de tiempo. Is there any other question for her? Okay, then I think we will move forward. Nancy, millón de gracias por estar hoy con nosotros y por levantarte tan temprano.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Gracias
un abrazo.
Por tenerte aquí. Gracias. I'm thanking her for waking up early, for being here with us. Okay, so I will continue to explain you very briefly about 2 cases from Panama, and then we will have, fortunately, 15 more minutes for discussion. Let me just take my papers, take my notes. So he's Alexis Rodriguez from Panama City. He's the research dean of the Universidad Especializada de las Américas and a consultant to the Latin American Social Sciences Institute. He is the consultant that we have hired for Panama, and he's precisely today on the field in Minera, Panama, one of the case studies. Let me show you a map. So I'm sorry because there are too many things here, but Minera, Panama is located here where these 2 dots are in the south. So it is an open pit copper mining concession belonging to the Canadian First Quantum Minerals. It is surrounded by the National Natural Park Omar Torrijos, so in an area of great biodiversity. In this case of Minera, the enterprise has settled up purposely a community committee that comes to collaborate with the company in the process of observation and monitoring of water quality during its installation in the country. They haven't started activities yet. The activity of the mine. So the members of those committees have been elected at the community level in 12 different communities. Those are the ones I was telling you about that are the so-called water resources defendants. These communities actually use Minera Panama, the enterprise, as a way to be linked to the government. I will explain that further. Minera Panama offers them capacity building and training. So the monitoring here is carried out in a participatory manner, and the communities participate in the entire chain of custody from the moment the water intake is taken until the sample is brought to Panama and set abroad for analysis in Guatemala, actually, to guarantee transparency. Those samples are taken with the help of the University of Chiriquí. They work with a trimestral agenda. Every 3 months, they organize meetings with 6 different communities so that they see all the communities every 6 months, because there are 12 communities that are doing the monitoring. And what is interesting about this case is that the project is managed by a third actor, which name is Avanzar, that is an NGO that ensures independence and verification of the results as such. At the very same time, and this is also interesting and it is something that Alexis is going to try to get deeper information about, is the fact that the government has at the same time its own monitoring procedures. They monitor 8 sample points that are clearly established by public institutions, actually under the environmental impact assessments, but they only inform the enterprise about the results. These 2 mechanisms, the 12 communities that are trained by Minera and the government monitoring team, do not interact, or at least not that we know so far. And are even doing monitoring, as I was saying, in different sampling points. So we suspect, or we think, that this comes from the fact that communities actually do not trust governmental procedures when monitoring, so they prefer to do them themselves with the help of the corporation. The second case study is Cemex. that is actually, it is non-metallic mining, and the enterprise extracts limestone for cement production. It is surrounded by the Chagres National Park, and it is inside the Panama Canal watershed. It is also marked there at the left, so next to the blue dot. The great biodiversity surrounding the area is protected with special provisions of the canal basin, as I was explaining before. In this case, the committees have a long tradition of participation of communities and are included in the Committee of Basin, that is the interinstitutional committee that is linked to the protection of the canal basin. They are not thus PMCs specifically created around an enterprise activity as such. They participate together with technicians from the government in early warning monitoring and in the audit process when they find some values and parameters that are not correct. So this process is thus developed by public institutions with the great participation of the surrounding communities who work together cyclically through the so-called Interinstitutional Committee of the Hydrographic Basin of the Panama Canal. The Autoridad del Canal, the authority of the canal, trains constantly the members and provides them with the kit, with all technical capabilities they need to carry out the monitoring. And the process is transparent and very well documented. So this was the very last example I wanted to bring here. I would like maybe to call Flaviano on stage for the final remarks, since we have, for the final questions and remarks, since we only have 10 minutes left. Maybe if you have any more questions for us that haven't been tackled. Okay, so then sorry.
Well, I think that the lady over there partly asked this question, but it concerns how you then, once you have the data, how do you make use of it in the dialogue with the companies? Because sometimes these areas are so complex, so how do you know, or how can you trace, for example, the pollution or whatever it might be that you have found to the exact activities of the mining company? And in the same area there might be other types of mining activities, maybe medium and small scale activities, etc. And sometimes the communities, even though they are indigenous and maybe nature conservation might be a central part of their living, there's still, you know, a lot of pollution that can be linked to their daily activities, etc. So how can you verify this, like what affects what, etc.? And also my second question relates to what you were calling the social impact assessment and the human rights impact assessments, because are these committees that you form or that are already formed, are they trained around these more of social issues? Because you said that it requires a long-term dialogue with the communities and maybe staying in these communities for a long time to trace these perceptions that you were talking about. So can that be done by these committees, or does it require a third party coming in and being more of a independent, if you say so?
Yeah, so as for the first question, well, sometimes at a community level, it's actually hard to understand. I mean, for example, when we saw pH, conductivity, those values, it's hard then to identify if there is the mine, or it can be agriculture, it can be wastewater or whatever. But if you go a little bit deeper, you can actually identify which is the pollutant. Like if we found lead into the water, for example, it's very rare that it comes from domestic use. So it depends. You can kind of trace where it came. Sometimes it's complicated, but generally maybe not really at community level, but with an external help. So we normally, when we trade communities, then they do the community monitoring, but we remain as sort of consultant, long-term consultant, that we can help them on deeper analysis. And in that case, you can normally identify, 90% of the time you can identify the source of pollution. And but in when you say the strategies, and here I link a little bit with a comment that I have done before. We always try to engage with the private sector and the company itself. So it would be like the ideal outcome of the committee is, once the committee has created, to end up with a shared monitoring system together with the company and the government. So there is, especially in Latin America, there is a strong mistrust between community and companies. But we believe that with science you can create a sort of common dialogue between the company and the community and the government to discuss what is happening inside the territory. So the first strategy is just to involve the company as much as you can. Then, of course, if the company is willing to involve, that's great. And that's, for example, the case of Carrizalillo in Mexico, where the companies decide to be involved, and nowadays they do a shared monitoring system. There are other cases in which the company doesn't want to be involved, and then it goes more up community that do the monitoring by themselves. But the goal, there is always the goal to try to involve the private sector into the monitoring, also because they are there, and so therefore you need it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. The second question was more of how you do the more of social impact monitoring and human rights monitoring.
Yeah. Well, normally, when I said it needs long term to train the human rights impact assessment tool is an instrument that is very community driven, and we normally spend 3 months to do the initial setup of the human rights impact assessment. So one or two person of our team spend 3 months within the community, and then the community continue by themselves, and that's a long and never-ending process in theory. So they continue to do it over maybe even 10 years. But yeah, while doing a water analysis, you can do it in 2 days or 3 days, while you cannot do a human rights impact assessment in 3 days, because you need to go and stay with the community and speak with them, a lot of community engaging and their perception, their way of life. It's more similar to like an anthropological study that you cannot do in a week.
Just a quick comment I will read, and then I'll give you the floor. So Gachi Tapia, the consultant from Argentina, just had a comment that she sent me. Around the question with the private about the private sector. She says it is important to mention that in our case it is the mining company, the one who looks for the people in the communities so that they can participate, and all the community depends on this enterprise. The problem of the joint committees is that they es que presupone que la actividad está aprobada y funciona. The problem with the joint committees is that they suppose that the activity is already approved and functioning. And in Latin American countries, there is a strong opposition against the installment and the arrival of mining companies. So yes, you can.
It seems like a lot of the examples that you've cited today are where you have cooperation with the state already. Are there examples of where these committees are operating effectively where there isn't cooperation from the government? I mean, oftentimes the government is involved in, for example, illicit mining. And are there examples where they're monitoring illicit mines as well? And how, in those cases, how do they exercise their agency or influence the process?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the case that I was presenting, the government was not involved at the beginning. So never. We always start from the community itself. All the cases, we never the government or the company were involved at the first stage, while it happened at the second stage. So when the community starts to do the monitoring, then the government starts to get involved, and then the companies in some case, and the government in some case the companies. So in our case, it's always been like really community-driven, community from zero basically, and then joined by governments and companies. I think the only case is Peru, where, but even in that case, if you take it from a national point of view, the first committees were already 10 years ago. I was there in 2008 doing in a month, like, yeah, 2009, 9 years ago, and there were already the first committees into the, especially on the Amazon River, on Amazon forest with oil extraction, and then was moved to the Andes, and it's just a couple of years ago that the government took this and make it as a government program, and nowadays they have 140, 150, and that's kind of the. I mean, that's to me is a wonderful. You know, when we started 10 years ago, there were like a few committees in the middle of nowhere, and nowadays there are already 150. I mean, I'm not jealous of the fact that the government take it, and I would love to be taken from more governments around.
Yeah, also, for instance, in the first case I presented on Panama, the government was doing monitoring, but completely separated from the monitoring committees that depend or are paid by the enterprise. So not in all the cases the government supports them. We are not working with illicit mining, as you were mentioning, but maybe for a second round that would be interesting. Okay, so this is the last question we will hear, because we have to wrap up in 2 minutes. We are finishing the session.
Thank you. My name is Kim Sundström. I work at the Swedish International Development Agency. And first, I just wanted to say I agree with my colleague here on the fact that it would have been interesting to hear from the private companies more about compliance issues, about their challenges, about how they tackle different issues. But I wanted to move to what you said before, because I got a little bit of a contradictory impression that you said on the question of payment to these committees to work and function. You said first that yes, sometimes it's not ideal to do that because it can create conflicts, and then you said sometimes you have to pay them in order for them to get the work done. But I think working in sort of our ultimate goal is poverty reduction from a rights-based approach, and we also think that we hear a lot about the assumption that community-based work and community engagement should always be free or shouldn't cost anything. And so I just wanted to hear, how do you make that decision? I mean, of course, it's context specific. I assume that whether you have to pay for these people's time to do this work. But on the other hand, I understand that there must be, a lot of dialogue happening with the community so that you ensure that you don't pay one group and not the other, and so on. And who finance that in the end? Is it donors? Is it coming from donors like Sweden, from UNDP? Who is that money coming from? And then my other question was your picture of the school where children's education is disrupted because of the mining and because of these companies. So what mechanisms needs to be in place for them to take their complaints further then? Because yes, they can conclude that children's education in this community is not good. So what link do you provide then for them to take this case forward with policymakers? Thank you.
Okay, so very briefly to clarify on the very first comments, what I meant is that they should be paid when they do a one-day work for the monitoring as such, for the monitoring activity. And I think he was rather referring to professionalizing the activity and having people paid the whole month, right, for doing the activity as their own profession.
So we as an organization, we don't pay them a salary. Because we don't want them to become like our employees. So, but of course, if they have to skip their job once a week, we give them like we call it a token. That is normally like the minimum amount that they can have, but it's not all cases. And we remind to the communities, so the community who decide if they want to give them a small token for the days that they spend doing monitoring, or if they don't. If you ask where the money come from, in our case, we are an NGO and it comes from foundations, and in our specific case, mainly from US-based foundations. And then on the other questions. So in that case of the education, this is, it's a part of a big pictures, are big studies that we are doing. So this absence to right to education is just a part. We also studied, we know that in that specific case, we have 100% of the population with heavy metals in their body because we analyzed hair. We know that they have no water. So it's a huge study that we have made. And we are trying to influence policy making to obtain the mitigation of those impacts. And in that specific case, we are asking to move the school in a place that is more far from the mine, because it's not that the city is 80,000 inhabitants. It's not that every person in the city has to move out when there is the explosion at noon. It's just the first meters around the open pit. So in that specific case, the mitigation that we are asking is to build a new school like 500 meters far away, so that they don't have to go out of the school 1 hour every day. But it's part of a bigger, I mean, that was just a small example to explain how the right to education can be affected. It's part of a bigger studies in which we are asking a lot of things, because that, as I said this morning, is like the perfect clear-cutting example to how to not to do mine. And therefore that's just a part of it.
Thank you very much, all. I will ask Flaviano in 1 minute to do the wrap up of the session. I have a small question for you as a practitioner that has been in the field. Is what would be the recipe for you to have or to create monitoring committees? What should be their key characteristics so that they work properly and that they can influence in the decision-making processes? Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, if I have to say this in 1 minute, I would say the one is enough. The key elements, I think, it's transparency and effectiveness. So you need to be transparent. There must be very open, that everybody, government, companies and other people around the communities trust them, and also effectiveness. So like they need to work properly, and that seems to be obvious, but it's not sometimes. So it also needs a lot of following up and practice to be effective over time. So those are the two key elements to me.
Thank you all. Thank you for attending this session, and thanks to those who are following us online as well. Thank you very much.